So, right off the bat, I understand that a keyboard and mouse are simply the most optimal way to game on PC. However, there are times where using a controller just makes a lot more sense, whether it would be for fighting games or traveling. So for those people who are searching for a controller to use on PC, I've tested 5 controllers, and with that said, I will tell you which one is the best all-rounder and the worst controller of the bunch. Let's begin. Here's a disclaimer, I will be testing each of these controllers through 4 different genres and only those 4. I will make my decision based on how good each controller is for every genre. I will also be very critical and very nitpicky, so keep that in mind. This is also all based on how I feel about each one, so it's personal. So with that said, let's get into the video. First, we've got the Steam controller. This controller can only be used with a computer and is optimized for use in Steam, obviously. It's made out of a relatively light plastic with 2 surfaces on top that behave as trackpads. You will get XYAB buttons, 1 joystick, trigger buttons, and back pedals. This controller can be used both wired and wirelessly with a wireless adapter. Next up is the PlayStation 4 controller. It can be on PC, both wired and wirelessly, but for wireless use it takes a little more tinkering on PC. However, if you've got a micro USB to USB-A cable, it's just plug and play. It comes with a standard PlayStation 4 button and analog stick layout, with a very comfortable grip on the back. It is also the lightest and easiest to travel with of the bunch, while having full support on Steam. Next, it's the Xbox One S controller. This controller has the greatest amount of functionality on PC, with it being able to connect through Bluetooth easily, or wired if preferred. The joysticks have a great grip, and the triggers are very well positioned. Next, it's the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. This controller is also very easy to connect through Bluetooth, where it can be used wired. The buttons layout is similar to the Xbox's, though some buttons are reversed. That issue can be fixed on Steam by remapping the buttons on the controller so you don't mistake one button for another in games. It has a great stick layout and comfortable grip. Lastly, we've got the Razer Raiju. This controller has a very comfortable grip and a plethora of customizable buttons, though these can only be programmed with buttons already available on the controller. It can only be used wired, however, though this controller will give you the greatest similarities to using a mechanical keyboard, because the front-facing buttons are mechanical and the programmable buttons are insanely clicky. First, let's begin with an action open-world game. This is Final Fantasy XV, the Windows edition. The Steam controller performed okay with this game. I found that turning the camera isn't so big of a deal, so the trackpad did the job just fine. However, due to the joysticks and buttons being so close to each other, using this controller for fast-paced action felt pretty cramped and uncomfortable. The PS4 controller performed a little bit better. Everything was within reach and the joysticks were grippy enough. Some of the buttons were probably a bit too soft to make playing and moving quickly optimal with this controller, so in a way, I felt like I was slowed down a bit by it. The Xbox One's controller performed very admirably. The joysticks were solid, buttons felt tactile enough, and the triggers were fine. With this controller, I felt like I was able to move at full speed and didn't encounter any difficulties. The Nintendo Switch controller was also a considerably good performer in this genre. The joysticks felt very solid, and the triggers were as fantastic as ever. However, the distinct button layout did slow me down, and Final Fantasy XV didn't register the changes I made through Steam. The Razer Raiju was a great performer. The mechanical-like buttons helped make me a little faster in-game, and because the trigger stops are adjustable, I was able to make the triggers register halfway through a press, hence speeding things up. The joysticks were also on point. However, Steam struggles with registering the Razer Raiju as a PlayStation controller, meaning that you will be left guessing which buttons to press when a prompt shows up on screen. First place goes to the Xbox One's controller, for it being so easy to manage on Steam and having the most comfortable control scheme for the genre. Second place goes to the Razer Raiju, as it was the most comfortable of the bunch, but its drivers have been a pain to get it to be recognized as a PlayStation controller through Steam. Third place goes to the PS4 controller for being a decent controller for the genre overall. Next up, it's turn-based games. Usually a much more laid-back genre that doesn't require any crazy controls. This is Final Fantasy IV. The Steam controller performed alright in this segment. I wouldn't recommend using the D-pad as it is just terrible and clunky, but with the joystick, it was actually a decent experience, though probably a little large for such a simple genre. The PS4 controller was very comfortable while playing through this genre. The control scheme is simple, the controller is very lightweight, and using the D-pad was just the natural way to go with this setup. The Xbox One's controller was also very good in this regard, though using the D-pad to move around felt a little clunkier. Other button presses felt pretty natural. The Nintendo Switch Pro Controller was not very efficient in my opinion. The D-pad, while having a great texture, is just too stiff for laid-back gaming like this. Everything else, such as button responsiveness and using the joystick instead of the D-pad, was pretty effective. The Razer Raiju performed well, but it's just too much for simple turn-based gaming. It also has to be tethered to a wire, and the D-pad is just far too stiff for this genre. The joysticks are massive, and, well, a lot just gets in the way of having a simple experience with such a complicated controller. First place goes to the PlayStation 4 controller. Its shape, buttons, layout, and weight are just ideal for this genre of games. Second place is the Xbox One's controller, as it was comfortable enough to use, but the D-pad's placement was just a bit awkward for this genre. Third place goes to the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, as it was similar to the Xbox One controller, but a little clunkier to use. Next up, it's the 2D fighter genre. Definitely a more involved genre than the previous one. For this genre, D-pad placement and feel will also play a large role in its success, but triggers and front-facing buttons will be taken into large consideration. This is Mortal Kombat X. The Steam controller doesn't do too badly with a super stiff D-pad. However, you'd be better off just using the joystick. Overall, this controller didn't do too bad in this genre. Combos weren't too hard to make, but it just wasn't very fluid. Definitely a compromising experience. The PS4 controller was actually pretty decent until I needed to use the trigger buttons. R2 and L2 in particular felt too soft and slow for this kind of genre. Aside from that, the D-pad performed okay. The Xbox One's controller was pretty good. Without realizing it, I continued to switch between the D-pad and the analog stick, but both are actually pretty good. Triggers were also responsive enough, which is appreciated. The Nintendo Switch Pro controller was honestly a little weird. The triggers were fantastic as always, but the D-pad, as good as it feels, it's just a little too stiff to get the kind of speed needed for this genre, and the joystick was arguably a bit too soft. Very nitpicky, I know, but these are all important factors. The Razer Raiju performed admirably. I was able to readjust the trigger stops to register halfway, hence increasing my speed. The D-pad was a bit stiff, but still very usable. Dare I say that the grips helped quite a bit in this genre. First place goes to the Razer Raiju, due to its D-pad and especially its trigger customization. Second place goes to the Xbox One's controller, thanks to it having a good placement of both a good D-pad and decent triggers. And third place goes to the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. This is because of its incredible triggers and still usable D-pad. Lastly, first-person shooters. The D-pad won't hold much weight in this segment, but the triggers and joysticks will be a big part of each controller's success. This is Doom. The Steam controller was the absolute worst performer in this genre, without question. The trackpad that behaves as the right analog stick is a complete compromise. You have to keep swiping it in order to continue turning instead of just holding down the joystick that should be there. Triggers are positioned a little awkwardly, so reaching for your fire trigger is just awkward. The PS4's controller certainly performed a lot better. The joysticks felt right, and the triggers didn't slow me down very much. Still, didn't really feel very responsive. At the very least, just not as responsive as it could have. The Xbox One controller did very well in this segment, though I think that for this kind of genre, I would have preferred to have concave sticks rather than convex. Just would have been more comfortable since you constantly have to keep your fingers on them, and the stick heads can feel a little restricting in that regard. Aside from an acceptable experience there, using the triggers felt just right. The Pro controller actually performed very well in this segment. The joysticks felt just right and were very smooth. And again, the fantastic triggers felt natural for this genre. The grip was also just about perfect. I love this controller for first-person shooters. Which, when you think about it, it's kind of a shame because we just don't have many in the Nintendo Switch's library. The Razer Raiju also performed very well. I love just stopping the triggers halfway in order to get a satisfying click when I use them to shoot. The grip was fantastic and the joysticks felt just right. First place will go to the Nintendo Switch Pro controller because it just felt perfect for this genre. Second place will go to the Razer Raiju, though it is a very close second. Third place goes to the Xbox One's controller because of the joysticks for the most part. Okay, we've made it to the conclusion. The best all-rounder is the Xbox One's controller. Everything about this controller is at least above average and syncs very well in Windows 10. Not to mention that, as you were able to see, it was in the top 3 for every genre I tested. The Razer Raiju is fantastic, but it's very expensive. Only get it if you already have a PS4 as well, so you can use it with more than just one platform. I probably wouldn't purchase a PS4 controller or Switch controller unless I own their respective console. That is, if you were just planning on buying one for PC. As for the Steam controller, just get any other controller on the list. On Amazon, the PS4 controller is cheaper and much better. So yeah, the winner is the Xbox One's controller, and the absolute worst is the Steam controller. For more content, make sure to subscribe to our channel, and to stay updated when a new video comes out, make sure to click on that bell and enable notifications. For links to every controller featured in this video, they'll be found in the description, as well as links for what to watch next. This has been Francisco from Tech Summit. Thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you all later. Enjoy.